Jacob married his second wife, Johanna Voigt, after his first wife died on June 25, 1843. They had 5 children: Caroline, Brigham, Julianne, Jacob, and Lucretia. Jacob immigrated via the ship Westmoreland to the United States on April 29, 1857 with Johanna, John William, Caroline, Brigham, and Julianne. They arrived May 31, 1857, then moved across the plains via the 7th Handcart Company around June 1857. About 330 Scandinavian saints were in the 7th Handcart Company. They were only allowed to bring 15 pounds of personal items each. The company consisted of 66 handcarts and 4 mule-drawn wagons. It was organized by James P. Park and 8 sub-captains. Park was a Scotsman and could not understand Danish. The arrangement was not considered satisfactory, so Christensen, who was a returned missionary that had earned passage on a wagon, gave up his place on that wagon and consented to serve as the Danish captain. Sub-captains were appointed to be in charge of 16 to 17 groups. On reaching the Loup Fork, July 16th, some Indians familiar with the crossing of the river were hired to help. Some were hauled across in wagons pulled by double teams. The emptied carts were taken across by some of the strongest men. Some women rode on the backs of the nearly naked Indians who guided the horses. At Wood River, a Sister Anne Marie Sorensen retired from camp and under some willows gave birth to a baby girl. In the morning she appeared with a baby in her apron. The baby survived, as did her mother. The company arrived at Fort Laramie on August 9th, with their supplies and food dwindling and being rationed. A detachment of the Utah expedition, the army going west to discipline the saints, was traveling near the Danish Handcart Company. An ox belonging to the soldiers was disabled when a heavy wagon ran over and crushed its foot. The military captain came over to the hungry immigrants and said, "You may have the ox. I guess you need it." The meat was gratefully devoured. 1 of every 10 of our numbers died during the journey. The 7th Handcart Company made much faster time than the 6th Handcart Company. In fact, the 7th arrived 1 day after the 6th, although they had started 3 weeks later than the 6th. The 7th Handcart Company arrived September 16, 1857, all in excellent spirits, time, and condition. The following information was provided by Handcarts to Zion by Leroy R. Hafen and Ann W. Hafen. The background video clip is from the Trail of Hope video. Jacob settled in Scipio and later Monroe. He became the stake patriarch. Before he came to the Americas, he was able to baptize Anthony Lund. In a blessing, Jacob told Anthony that he would someday be one of the 12 apostles. Whenever Apostle Lund came to Monroe to conference, he referred to Jacob as Father Julander and had Jacob sit on the stand beside him. John came to America when he was 15 years old with his father on the ship Westmoreland. He then went to Utah via the 7th Handcart Company. He was later sent back to help another company. John never talked about his experiences with the handcart companies. He also would not talk about the Black Hawk Indian War because he believed it was bad enough to have lived them without bringing them to memory. Magdalene, John's wife, was born in Sweden in 1848. She was very efficient. Her husband said, quote, "Had she lived, he would be a very wealthy man." She died October 1895. John was 6 feet tall with well-developed muscles. He was powerful but agile enough to be one of the fastest foot racers in the valley. As a young man, he loved foot racing, baseball, and horse racing. Grant told this story about his dad. One day, Dad was in the saloon. He had tied up old Jeff out in front to the hitching post. There was another man there, and they got to talking. This man had his big old workhorse out front and was bragging that he could pull a lot of weight. They went out front. Dad drew a circle around old Jeff and bet the man $10 that his horse could not pull Jeff out of that circle. He and his big old horse tried, but old Jeff would not budge. Another time Dad was riding through town, he met these two men trying to get their big old bull over to the auction without much success. Dad told them that was no way to get him there. They said, "Do you think you can get him there?" And Dad said, "You bet." They asked him how much, and he replied $10. He tied the rope onto the saddle horn and told his two dogs to get him, and he took him right to the auction. It must have been hard on them guys, because they probably only got $50 for that bull. Odell said, "He never forced his ideas on anyone. I do not remember him arguing with anyone, but we all knew he told nothing but the truth. We had complete confidence and respect for him. In a way, he was stern, yet also good-natured and jovial at times with family and friends." John had a reputation of being a totally honest man. He was also known as Happy Jack. Ida was something special, and the gentlest of all women. Her brother referred to her as the good woman, unselfish, always considerate of everyone. After Ida's death, Odell had a dream of her coming down a trail. As she came down the trail, the plants on both sides would burst instantly into bloom. Soon she was completely surrounded by brilliant blossoms, and she raised her arms with the most delightful expression. Eliezer developed a skill with the sick as well as the suffering animals. This put him in great demand among the pioneers. He loved children, and was never too busy to wait for some of his grandkids to go to the farm with him. Eliezer married Emmeline Zanita Winsor September 5, 1872. Eliezer married Emmeline in Pipe Springs, Utah. They later settled in Asa Creek. Eliezer took Harriet Hatch as a second wife there. Due to the fact that polygamy was outlawed, he moved Emmeline and her children to Elsinore. One day he and Haiti were riding along in a wagon when suddenly a man on horseback appeared on the road ahead. Realizing that this man coming toward them could be one of the marshals, Haiti turned to her husband to know what to do. There he sat, with one eyelid down over one eye, the other looking straight ahead, and his mouth pulled out of shape on one side, completely disguising his appearance. He looked so comical and so queer, it was all she could do to keep from laughing before the man passed by. Eliezer later took his family and went to Milford. They boarded the train with all of their livestock and went as far north as the train went, and settled in Lavelle, Wyoming country. Emmeline refused to go with him and raised her family in the Monroe area of Utah. Joseph holding his twin sons Eliezer and Aaron. Joseph and Phoebe ran away to Philadelphia to get married because Joseph's parents objected to the marriage. At the age of 18, his parents didn't think he was mature enough to take on the responsibility of marriage and a family. Joseph and Phoebe were converted to the church and came by boat to Council Bluffs, Iowa, and then on to Salt Lake City by oxen. Joseph and 3 of his sons were called to go on the muddy mission, but 6 sons went with him at the time, leaving Sarah and the rest in Salt Lake City. Many trials, such as malaria, befell the Asa family while on this muddy mission. Major John Wesley Powell, who explored the Colorado River, had started down the river after purchasing 3 sacks of flour and other supplies when he met Joseph Asa and his 2 sons who were fishing. They took them into their cabin and cooked all they could for them, of fish and squash and etc. It must have been a thrilling experience to the Asa boys to meet feed, and listen to the tales of this intrepid adventurer. When the land was surveyed, it was determined that the Muddy Valley was in Nevada, so Nevada taxed them very heavily, taking almost everything they were able to acquire up to that point. President Young advised the settlers to return to Utah. The Asays went over to Mount Carmel. They were called to go into the United Order and move to Orderville, but decided not to join, and it proved to be the best decision for them. They stayed in Mount Carmel in the winter and farmed the ranch at Asay Creek in the summer. The climate at Asay Creek was rather severe for crops, and the boys went to raising cattle and horses. In 1870, Anson was called to Pipe Springs to take charge of the church cattle. While there, Indians attacked and killed 2 of the settlers. Anson saved an old Indian from being drowned by a soldier. When he brought news of the killings, the old Indian woman would never leave Anson after that and lived nearby until his death. Anson supervised the building of the Winsor Castle. Before the fort was constructed, the family lived in a dugout and in a covered wagon. Odell Julander tells of the following experiences. My grandmother, Emmeline Zanita Winsor, spent her younger days at Winsor Castle at Pipe Springs. In 1933, I took her out from Kanab to Winsor Castle, where she helped me make butter and cheese to send to the St. George Temple workers. She also showed me great-grandmother's shotgun that always hung under the fireplace mantel. Just knowing it was there kept her fear away, even when the men folk were out. A picture of great-grandmother hung above the mantel in 1933. When the St. George Temple was completed, Anson was called to work in that temple, where he spent the rest of his life.